Hey, Damo here. I've finally got round to sitting down to talk a bit about my Atmos setup that I have running in here. I've had it set up and working for a couple of months now. Been listening to all sorts, have all sorts of thoughts on the subject of Atmos mixes as they are at the moment. I will do another video about that. I've got all sorts of things to say on that subject. But I thought I would talk here a bit about the process, and it was probably nearly a 2-year process from the idea that I had of setting up an Atmos system, basically because I got a bee in my bonnet about mixing one of my Pathfinder albums in Atmos, to all the way to where I am now, where it is set up and running and pretty awesome. So this video could be useful to anyone that is thinking about setting up an Atmos system on a medium to low budget. You know, anyone that's got a ton of money to spend on it, you know, this is not going to be for you. You know, if you're Genelex all the way in a fancy pants studio and you got, you know, 30 or 40 grand spend or something or more, then nah. You know what you're doing. Go and get Dolby to set it up for you. This is useful for people who have the same sort of bracket that I have. I did all sorts of spreadsheets and tried to work out what I was going to spend, and I ended up coming up with a budget. Well, my maximum budget was £7,000, which would be equivalent in euros or dollars pretty much, for the sake of argument. Although my spreadsheet with everything listed in it was just shy of that. It was about 6.5, and that was including, I thought I was going to have a Mac Mini at the time. I've got a different computer, so it was a bit less. Blah blah blah. But yeah, we're talking a budget of about £5,000-7,000, and I should say that I ended up setting it all up for considerably less because I had quite a lot of time between when I was sort of ready to go and when I finally got this room, because it took me ages to get this room. I've talked about that in another video. I was on waiting lists for ages and so on, and that actually gave me quite a lot of time to just sit back and wait for stuff to come up on eBay. I bought a lot of it, everything I could. I bought secondhand, in good condition, but you know, as cheaply as possible, and I got some absolute cracking bargains along the way. So I actually it's a bit ambiguous what I spent, because you can put everything in this room setup that isn't necessarily to do with Atmos into the equation. But just thinking about the Atmos setup, I think I ended up spending about 4,000. But if the price, if you bought everything new as I had it in my original spreadsheet, was going to be, like I say, just somewhere over £6,000. And where do you go? So you've got this idea, as I had. Okay, I'm going to set up an Atmos system. I should say that I thought about mixing it in binaural, doing it in headphones, but I knew that wasn't going to cut the mustard for what I wanted to do. I could maybe have just paid for studio time in an existing studio, someone else's Atmos studio, but I've got to learn how to do it first. I don't want to just be spending an absolute ton of money to go and do sessions to learn, and I just fancied it. So it's also a really nice hi-fi system. You know, it's a £6,000 hi-fi system in a room, which is pretty banging. But anyway, where do you start? Probably the first thing that people think about is, what speakers am I going to get? What interface am I going to get? What's the interesting stuff going to be? But the reality is that's not what you have to think about when you're setting up an Atmos system. What you have to think about is quite a lot of really mundane stuff. What's the room? It's one thing, and still absolutely necessary if you're in a stereo or a 2.1 system. But if you've got 12 speakers in a room, you've got to make sure that it is not going to be woofing at you in every direction. You've got to treat the room nicely. And I have done that. It's good. I'm pretty happy with it. As it turns out, this room, which is essentially a rehearsal room, has carpet all over the walls. So, as again I've talked about in another video, it's actually worked out quite well because it's pretty dead sounding in here to start off with. But I've also done a lot more on top of that. So yeah, you're thinking about room treatment. You're thinking about brackets. This is super important. And before you decide on what speakers you want to get, you've got to make sure you're going to be able to get brackets to put them on the ceiling. You can see just above my head there, I ended up, because I only have low ceilings in here, I didn't want big 8-inch speakers coming on this ceiling. So I've got Yamahas. I'll get more into the speaker setup I've got in a minute, but you can see my brackets up there. And one of the things and the reasons I went for Yamahas was because they have really handy brackets that just work straight into the speakers. But brackets are really expensive. And the more expensive the speakers, the more expensive the brackets, if you can even get brackets for them. So I'll show, and I'll walk through my spreadsheet in a minute because I had all sorts of different pricings for different speakers. But actually, I realised halfway through this first process of, what speakers am I going to buy? It's like, well, hang on a second. You can't even get brackets for this. So how am I going to get 4 of these speakers on the ceiling? I'm going to have to make mounts, or how's that going to work? And yeah, some of the brackets you buy can be the price of speakers just for the bracket. It's really boring, but it's like, well, if you're going to stick speakers on the ceiling, they've got to be up there properly. I've got people coming in and out here and what have you, and I can't have them falling on people's heads, obviously, right? And yeah, cabling. You need a shit ton of cables because I've only got a small room, so it's 2 meters, essentially the circle of my Atmos rig. The diameter is less than 2 meters. But the cables aren't going straight from my interface to each of the speakers, right? To keep it tidy and everything hidden away and tucked away, you end up with 6-meter cables for each one of these. Maybe not the front ones, but to get them to the back of the room and all hidden out the way. And so that's 12 cables for all your audio cables, TRS or XLR cables rather, to the speakers, power cables, and then, all the powers. I mean, it's just, you got a lot to think about. There's a lot of logistics, and each of those has a cost that you don't necessarily take into account because you're just thinking, how much is a set of speakers going to cost? The reality is you've got to buy. I mean, I kept going back, even though I'd bought everything in advance. When I was setting up a couple of months ago, I kept having to go back to the shop because my speaker just was just that little bit too far for the cables I bought. I thought were going to be easily long enough. Yeah, it's pretty boring, a lot of the stuff, and just the work. I don't know if you can see again above me, because this is not my room. I have to treat it carefully. I've very carefully built brackets to follow along the beams in the room, so you can see my bespoke for each speaker wooden brackets so that I can mount these up on the ceiling. It took ages. It was fiddly. I did a lot of it on my own, precariously picking up speakers on a step ladder on my own. But yeah, we did it. It worked, and it's fine. You can do it even if you are pretty much doing it on your own, as I can testify. But it's going to cost some quids, so allow for that. So what interface are you going to use? One of the things, you've got 12 speakers, and there isn't an immediate volume knob. You're going to have some kind of monitoring setup. And I should say that actually, even in the time since 2 years ago, when I first thought about doing this and I started researching into all the aspects of setup and how Dolby Atmos works and all blah, 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 there's a lot more stuff has come available. And I might have sort of looked at doing it in different ways, had had I known what was going to be available. One thing that has been super useful in the end was a bit of software called Sphere by Ginger Audio, which I didn't know anything about at first, but is absolutely fantastic for monitoring and for playing Apple Music and certain aspects. But also there are now actually interfaces that you can buy that are specifically geared up towards having 12 or more outputs specifically for Atmos. When I first started looking, it was like the Avid Matrix setup, which I mean is $5,000 before you've opened the door. There was a Focusrite one, which was looking at $4,000 or $5,000, and that was my whole budget. I couldn't think about doing that. Couldn't justify doing that. So I decided I was going to use RME because they're fantastic interfaces anyway. And I thought at first I was just going to buy a single RME interface and then perhaps have to run a few of perhaps the ceiling speakers via ADAT. But I ended up doing it a different way and a much cheaper way, which is working absolutely perfectly, which is I bought 2 old Firewire 800s for £200 each. What would have been, I don't know, £1,400 interfaces. I managed to get one for like £204 and one for £190, which is nuts. And I can sync the two together, and that gives me like 100 in and out. It's amazing. And the other thing that's amazing about RME is they have their little ARC monitor controller. So if you're on a low budget, not ridiculously low, but if you're on this kind of budget, I think RME is a brilliant way to go. But there's the Audient, I think they're called, is an interface that you can now get. Audient Araya, I'll put the name up on screen, I can't remember it right now, but that's about £2,000 for the interface, but that's an all-in-one package, which is actually brilliant, so that's definitely something to consider. But the way that I've done it is with 2 RME, quite old now, Fireface 800 interfaces. I already had a ridiculous cable that's probably, I had it for years from my old Motu interface, which was a Firewire interface. And I've got this cable that goes from Firewire 400 to 800 to Thunderbolt to other Thunderbolt to Lightning Bolt to go into the Mac now. It's ridiculous. And I didn't think it was going to work, but it does. It works perfectly. So I can synchronize the two together, word clock sync, and just this stupid cable that goes into my Mac works like a dream, actually. So my interface, £400 plus £100 for the ARC little controller, which I'll show in a minute. I'll do a walk around of the room in a minute so you can see everything. So I got all the interfacing for about £500. So to backtrack slightly, when I first thought about setting up a Dolby, I actually couldn't justify it whatsoever. If the only reason I was doing it was for that, it would have been ridiculous for me personally. But I figured, perhaps convince myself, that if I could have a room that I could rehearse in with my bands, we could write music in with my bands, we could record in with various bands, and for my own stuff, I could stereo mix as well, and also set up Dolby Atmos. Then I could justify the monthly rent and the cost of it all, which seemed, and it does seem like quite a tall ask to have a single little room that does that. I've got to say, I've got it set up now and it's pretty banging. But that was a prerequisite. So in terms of the speakers that I chose, I already had my Kali In8 that I love and I love mixing on. And I didn't want to not have those. And obviously with the space I've got, I didn't want to have a stereo set of speakers, and then the whole Atmos setup as well. It had to incorporate everything. And I also have a subwoofer, and that needs to also be part of my stereo 2.1 system, as well as my Atmos 7.4.1 system. And that's somewhere where that Sphere software is amazingly good, because that has bass management in it. So actually that allows me to use my subwoofer traditionally, running through there to the speakers, and also do it just as a straightforward LFE channel, the low frequency sub channel in Atmos, which I don't think I'd be able to do that if it wasn't for Sphere, Ginger Audio Sphere, which I should point out is a few £100 to buy the software, but it's bloody good. Anyway, so my starting point was two Kali in8s. They are big speakers. These are not Genelec little, dinky powerhouse speakers. They are fantastic, but the compromise is they're quite large, and there is absolutely no way on earth, even if I got their smallest 6-inch ones, that I could get them on the ceiling. And also to have them all around the room was going to prove to be a bit expensive. And their brackets are like £200 each speaker, something stupid like that. So there was no way that I was going to be able to get the same speakers all around the room. So do I just sack it off and say, well, I'll get different speakers then? But I was looking at having lower, that would have meant I'd had much lower quality speakers, and that wasn't something I was going to do. So I got to a certain point and I realized, okay, there's going to have to be different speakers at the front, and then all of the surrounds will be the same brand. So that's what I ended up doing. I've got 3 Kalis. I bought an additional center Kali, so all 3 are the same at the front. And then, to cut to the chase, mostly because of the brackets that you can get for the ceiling ones, I went for Yamaha HS series speakers for all the rest of the room, including the sub that I already had. And I, over the time that I was waiting to get the room and was just cherry picking, buying bits and bobs on eBay, I managed to get the 4 ceilings brackets, even actually before I bought the speakers, quite cheaply, way less than half the price if I'd bought them new. So that was quite helpful. So yeah, in the end, I've got Yamahas to the side, Yamahas to the back, Yamahas above, Yamaha bass, but my 3 central speakers at the front are Kalis. In a luxury perfect world, then I would probably just have Kali in8s all around the whole room. That would be fine for me. But like I say, not remotely possible in here. So even just the compromise of having the 5-inch Yamahas on the ceiling, because like I say, it is quite a low ceiling in here. But I've calibrated it all. I've got SonarWorks as well. That was, I'm sure most of you know what SonarWorks is, but it's a bit of software that EQ changes all of your speakers to adjust for the sound that is coming out of them, depending where they are in the room and depending on the room and everything. So everything's calibrated, and I think it all sounds absolutely great, if I'm honest. So yeah, I mean, over a course of about a year, I bought all the bits and bobs, other than, like I say, when I was setting it up, I had to keep going to the hardware store for these bolts, that bolts, whatever little bits and bobs. But all the main crux of it, I got just when stuff came up on eBay. Probably the best single deal that I got, and I'm actually pretty proud of this, was the one center Kali speaker that I got, the IN8. So this is a 300, I think they're about £330 each, as I recall. And I got one on eBay for £31, including postage, and it's in perfect condition. It came from, I I don't know what you call them, some kind of reclaim company, and it was listed as damaged. And I don't know, I bid. It was just a single speaker. I bid on it, and I thought it was worth a punt. It came up, and worst case scenario, it would be spare parts. And I actually expected that it was still going to go for nearly £100 or something. But yeah, I figured if I had a spare tweeter or woofer or whatever was still working in it, I'd buy it anyway. And it arrived a few days later, and it could have been brand new. £31. I was well chuffed. I think that was the best bargain. But I did stuff like I bought a load of XLRs, 6-meter XLRs in a bulk load. They were much cheaper than I'd have bought them any other way. They were secondhand, but in very good condition. I got a couple of the Yamahas very cheaply. The main HS8s. There's quite a few of those for sale online. The only speakers that I bought, other than my original Callies, the only speakers that I bought new were the ceiling speakers, because they're the ones that they're slightly more expensive because they have the bracket holes in. They're the HSI series. And in the whole time I was looking, there was nothing. They never came up at all. So I had to buy them new, but I still got them ex-demo, and I bought them white because they're a bit cheaper in white, but actually they sort of match the ceiling. So yeah, what am I saying? What I'm saying is the most important thing you've got to do is get the setup for your room. I actually really think this is the case now. And whilst I had pretty much decided how I was going to set it up before I got the room, I actually think I was quite lucky. I think the room should be the starting point. Treating the room, working out how you're going to put up brackets. By a country mile, the most annoying thing is getting speakers on the ceiling and routing wires to them. It's really annoying. And I've seen lots of other people talk about this online, just the ball ache they've had. It's good when you've got it done, but at the time it is ball ache. Even for my little ones, there are people that are putting full range 8-inch speakers up on the ceiling, and they've got great big highs. God, just I don't think I'll be able to do that on my own. But yeah, so my original budget, which was a maximum of 7,000, including buying the extra Ginger Audio software and other knickknacks and bits and bobs, I managed to do it all for about £4,000, which is a lot of money for a hi-fi, but it's pretty banging, and it is doable. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers the actual setting up. I did it. I was forced to do it at quite a leisurely pace over quite a long period of time, but that did allow me to get a lot of stuff on a budget. I'm going to turn the camera around, and I am going to show you a little bit around the room, and I'll talk about some of the compromises that I've had to make in a room that, like I say, is very multi-purpose. Before I show you around, I'll just give a quick run through of the spreadsheet since I've got it here. These were all the options. This was the tannoy options. I had 2 different tannoy options. I was never going to go for those, but I could have got them for under £2,000. This is all the prices if you bought them from a shop. Like I say, I ended up buying a lot of stuff on eBay and got it a lot cheaper than this. But this was how I was working out what I was going to get. So I had all sorts of different speaker options, Yamahas, Adam Audios, excuse me, different ranges, their T range, their A ranges. Cali mixed, Cali all the same. You get the idea. Full Dyne audio. I used to use BM5s. They're great speakers, but I don't think they have brackets, and they're also, it was going to be £4,000 for speakers. Eves, Genelecs, so all sorts of options. And then I was going to originally get a different Fireface, a newer one. But like I said, I ended up getting the older ones, so that worked out cheaper. And then, SonarWorks, I had some money in here for brackets, soundproofing. I even had money in for a work desk. I think I got this desk for £10. I think it was 10, maybe it was 20. You can get a bargain if you look around. Gumtree. I didn't mention actually the stands, because that's another thing you've got to get. You've got to get all these speaker stands. And I actually have, as you'll see in a second, one of the speakers on a shelf, which is not ideal, but it had to happen. But all the others are on stands. And I got a pair of stands that I already had from beforehand that came with my original Callies. And I bought, the other part of this spreadsheet is the purchase stuff. So I don't know if I've got them itemized in here. Stands 3. So 3 of these stands I got off Gumtree for £25 for 3 stands. They're all in perfect good condition. They're not great stands. I would love to have been able to spend more money on nicer stands. Nicer stands to also take up more room. These classic kind of speaker stands are, I don't know, they're basically tubular bells, really. And I was a bit worried that they were going to be a bit ringy. But they're actually all right. They proved to be okay. But yeah, anyway, I got 3 of them for £25, and then I think I had to buy a single one, which I managed to get for £34 online. So even that, it's another thing. How much are you going to spend on stands? Stands. Anyway, I think you get the idea. So that was my budget. Looking back again here, 6,155 I'd priced up from early on, and I ended up spending 3,900. Cool. Yup. All right, there you go. Looking at the front, there's the 3 center speaker and my 2 Callies. I love these speakers. They're really, really good. And to get that one, I bought that one for £31, including postage. I think you get the idea. I'm proud of that. But 3-way speaker for that. But otherwise, I think I paid probably £600 for the other 2 originally. So there's a couple of different ways you can set up an Atmos rig. There's equidistant, which is what my original plan was. I'll probably put up on screen in a second my original plans, because I had all mapped it all out. As soon as I knew the room I was going to have, I was trying to map out where everything was going to go. But the equidistant way of doing it is exactly what it sounds. So from your central listening position, which for me is here, obviously, all of your speakers going round, and ideally above you as well, are all equidistant from you, funnily enough. But what emerged quite quickly when I'd set up everything in here was that if I was going to keep to that, and I actually drew a chalk circle on the floor all the way around the room, and one of my speakers, like that speaker, for example, would have needed to be just about where my ride symbol is here, and this one would have needed to have been right in the way of the door where everyone comes in. Which was just a non-starter. So they ended up having to go in what would have been the other setup you can do, where you put the main speakers in the corners of the room and on the sides to make essentially a rectangle of speakers. I think it's called orthogonal. I think I'm right in saying that. So the rear speakers are set up as if it was orthogonal, but because I wanted to keep my sort of normal stereo mix position for my Callies and not have those over in the corners, I kept everything, all of the other speakers are set up as if it was going to be equidistant, except for the rears. I'll come back in my next video to how people are mixing for the most part on Atmos at the moment. And a lot of the time, there isn't a great deal coming out of the rears anyway. It's such a waste. But it hasn't been bothering me. They're calibrated anyway, so you know, I guess they just have to be a little bit louder than they would be, and the time delay is slightly greater than they would have been for those, but that doesn't really, it's not a problem. So another thing is the right rear speaker here is playing over the top of my cymbals, which is, you know, clearly not ideal. I thought it was going to be worse than it is, actually. I checked the calibration. It doesn't make too much difference. It doesn't bother me. I guess if somebody else wants to use the room and is worried, I can stick a blanket over the kit. But yeah. Compromise. It's not ideal. Is what it is. It doesn't really matter, but this is the only speaker that is not on a stand. It's exactly the same height as this one over here. But and again, it's calibrated, and it also has the DSP on the back of it, so I've adjusted it so it's next to the wall, blah blah blah. But I mean, we use this space is, you know, that's the sort of band PA mixer and other bits. So yeah, slight compromise, but actually it doesn't make any difference. So yeah, looking upwards, slightly low ceiling. It is slightly lower than the Dolby recommended spec. However, it is just high enough that I can get the correct angles. And yeah, is what it is. Didn't have much choice. So these are the HS5Is. And looking at some of the cabling as it goes round. I mean, I've got my fairy lights. I've talked about them in another video, and I sort of managed to hide a lot of the cabling along fairy lines. And I've also done stuff like use the existing where screws were holding in the plaster boards. I've just taken a screw out and put a hook in, so I can get my power neatly down to a speaker here. I actually have it set up so that all of the 4 surrounds and 4 ceilings, all the speakers are switched on from a switch. Just I think it's sort of blinking on this. You can see the green light of it there. It's just one switch does all the backs, which is quite handy. And yeah, there's quite a lot of wiring obviously going on around here. But yeah, I was going to play some music while I was talking through this, but I realised I'd get copyright striked if I played anything. I was actually listening to some Bob Marley before I started recording this. The Bob Marley Atmos mixes are really nice, and they've mixed his voice is coming through like almost on 5.1. It's different. There's no again. I'll come back to it, but there is no standard for how people are doing it at the moment, and it's weird. They're so varied how it's done. But yeah, the Bob Marley mixes actually do sound lovely. So 8-inch Yamahas round the sides, and then the 5-inch ones up on the ceiling. You can see these are the brackets. They're actually really, really good, these brackets. Specifically made for the Yamahas, the HS5Is. You can also get brackets for the HS7Is and HS8Is. But yeah, like I say, those would have been too big for me in this room. And I've made these wooden brackets specifically to run along the beams and do as little damage as possible to all the plasterboard and everything in the room, because I'm a good boy like that. Each one is different. So on this side, it had to be done differently. It goes across 2 beams here. Yeah, there you go. I stand back in the corner. You get to see the room as it is now as well. So I've got, set up for the band. It's a great place to rehearse and record. And I've also got the Atmos, and it's sounding banging. I'll just finish the video in selfie mode so you can see my face. Hopefully that was interesting. There's a lot more I could say. If there's any questions, if anyone wants to know anything, if I've glossed over something you want to know about, just feel free to put a comment below. And the next video, I think I will probably talk about what I think of Atmos mixes. I won't give anything away more than I already have at this point, but if you're up for that or other videos about music production and small music studio setup and so on, give us a subscribe. Go on. Take it easy. Bye.